Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
Fredo.
I thought that's who you were.
No, punk from the right call me Fredo. My name is Chris Cuomo. I'm an anchor on CNN. Fredo is from The Godfather. He was that weak brother.
Isn't that your brother?
And they use it as an Italian aspersion. Any of you Italian? Are you Italian?
I got a little.
It's an insult to your people. It's an insult to your people. It's like the N-word for us.
Oh, Fredo is like the N-word for us. Let me tell you what I think about this. In case you haven't heard, Chris Cuomo, brother of Governor Andrew Cuomo, is apparently caught at some event somewhere in New York City. And some guy walks up to him. Now, I don't know whether it was confrontational or not. I don't care. And refers to Chris Cuomo, who obviously Cuomo is Italian. Is Italian. And refers to him as Fredo. Now, if you look up Fredo in the Urban Dictionary, of course, it may have changed since all this happened, but Fredo has never been considered a racial or ethnic slur. Fredo comes from The Godfather. And Fredo, in the modern vernacular, over the years that The Godfather has been out, Fredo has always been a reference to the weak brother, kind of the black sheep. I think, in fact, the Urban Dictionary may even use the term the black sheep, which probably in of itself is racist, but hey, what do I know? Now, you may have heard that Sean Hannity has come out and defended Chris Cuomo. A lot of other people have come out. CNN has come out and said, we stand behind Chris Cuomo. I don't care. Here's what I do care about. I don't care whether or not Chris Cuomo is upset at this guy. Now, if this guy was confrontational toward Chris Cuomo and was confrontational unjustifiably so, I got a problem with that. But none of that really matters. What matters to me is the instantaneous. It is almost like a magnet. It is almost like, bugs to a bug light or a politician to a pile of cash that, somebody called me a word that, I find offensive, so I'm going to deem that word to be a racial epithet. Stop it. Just stop it. Fredo is not a racial epithet. And don't make, it's another example of everything is racist. Everything is racist. Including you, Fredo. Fredo. Speaking of racist, we all know that Donald Trump is a racist, right? Well, if you pay attention to the mainstream media, or for that matter, cable news or anybody else, everybody tells me that Donald Trump is a racist. Now, I've also seen some people talk about how black people cannot be racist. Now, I think that's a stupid premise. Because I think anybody, regardless of their skin color, regardless of their ethnicity, regardless of their sexual preferences, regardless of what they ate for breakfast, regardless of anything, I think that anybody can be racist. But since the left is now telling us that black people cannot be racist, let's take them at their word. Why do I want to do that? Because Tim Scott, the Republican junior senator from South Carolina, said this on Fox News Monday night.
Not a racist, and the facts are very simple, that the same folks that voted for me voted for President Trump because President Trump made promises to the voters and he's keeping the promises. So without any question, if you look at his legacy, it will be his accomplishments in office, frankly, helping in many, many ways African Americans. Think about the fact that we've all heard about how low the African American unemployment is, the lowest recorded in the history of the country. But more importantly, a racist would never talk about criminal justice reform and how the benefits disproportionately help African American men. President Trump signed that legislation into law. You would never hear a racist talk about opportunity zones and how he came on board full throttle because he wanted to help poor, disadvantaged communities. Most of them are consistently African American and Hispanic communities.
Oh, so if we're told that a black man cannot be racist, this black man, of course he's a Republican, so maybe I'm sure there's a carve out, there's an exception for a black man who happens to be a Republican, but in this case, nonetheless, he is a black man, which is probably more, his race is probably more a part of his being than his political affiliation. I mean, when people ask you who you are or what you are, is one of the first things you say, I'm a card-carrying member of the Republican Party. I'm a card-carrying member of the Democrat Socialists of America. Well, they would know that because you'd be sounding stupid anyway. So here you have Tim Scott telling us that Donald Trump is not a racist, and Tim Scott is a black man, and the left has told us that blacks cannot be racist. Therefore, Donald Trump is not a racist, per Tim Scott. End of story. Be right back. Now, some of you may be offended by what I'm about to talk about next. And by the time this podcast gets posted and you listen to it, whatever time you might listen to it on today, on Wednesday, something may have changed dramatically overnight in Hong Kong. But if you haven't been paying attention, and I never understood why the Brits gave up Hong Kong to the Chinese anyway, just as I never understood why the Israelis gave up the Gaza Strip to the Palestinians or to Hamas or Hezbollah or whomever. I just never understood some of these moves that countries have made. But nonetheless, Hong Kong is now part of China. It is separate but equal. Ever heard that phrase before? Speaking of racism, it's separate but equal in many ways. I'm troubled, though, by what I'm watching. Not that I disagree with what they're doing, because I absolutely, totally agree with what they're doing. They're protesting extradition laws. They are fighting for liberty. They are fighting for freedom. I even watched a video clip. I searched for this video clip. It was on the Bloomberg website, and I'm sure they took it down. But it was a very short clip on the Bloomberg Twitter feed in which they were interviewing, because a bunch of these Hong Kong protesters were walking down the street carrying American flags. And a reporter walked up and asked, "Why are you carrying American flags?" And this person, obviously with a surgical mask over their face because of the tear gas, turned to the reporter and said, "Because this flag and America stand for freedom and liberty, and that's what we're fighting for. This flag represents what we are fighting for." And before I get into my point about China and Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell, can I just say that I spent an inordinate amount of time trying to find that video because I wanted to retweet it. I wanted to show it to people, because people who denigrate the flag, which they have a constitutional right to do, you want to burn the flag, you want to stomp on it, have at it. It's your right to do so. But I would like those who denigrate the flag to see that some protesters are probably about to put their lives on the line in a battle for freedom, and the symbol they are using for their battle for freedom and liberty happens to be that United States flag that a lot of people trample on. It was an amazing, amazing video. If I ever run across it, I'll keep looking. If I run across it again, I'll play the soundbite for you. But here's what I think you may be upset about with me. Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, tweeted out a statement on democracy and autonomy in Hong Kong. And I don't want to read the whole statement, but his tweet said this: "The people of Hong Kong are bravely standing up to the Chinese Communist Party as Beijing tries to encroach on their autonomy and freedom. Any violent crackdown would be completely unacceptable. As I have said on the Senate floor, the world is watching." Pretty damn good statement. Thank you, Senator McConnell. Let's compare and contrast that with what President Trump said. Here's the official transcript of Trump's comments on Hong Kong on Tuesday. Question: Are you concerned about what you're seeing in Hong Kong? Do you want China to exercise restraint? Now, before I give you the answer that the president gave, that's a softball question. That is an underhanded, girly pitch right over home plate that anybody with no athleticism whatsoever could knock out of the ballpark. Yes, I would like to see the Chinese government show restraint. These people are fighting for freedom and autonomy, and I urge China not to crack heads. That's what I would have said. Here's what the president said. The Hong Kong thing is a very tough situation, very tough. We'll see what happens, but I'm sure it'll work out. I hope it works out for everybody, including China, by the way. I hope it works out for everybody. Question. Have you seen the gathering of military troops apparently close to protesters? And there's worries about that. The president said, it's a very tricky situation. I think it will work out, and I hope it works out for liberty. I hope it works out for everybody, including China. I hope it works out peacefully. I hope nobody gets hurt. I hope nobody gets killed. How about this, Mr. President? It's a very tricky situation, and I'm not sure it's going to work out. These people are fighting for liberty. I do hope it works out for everybody, and I hope it stays peaceful. And in fact, I would encourage China not to crack heads, not to use military intervention, and to show restraint. End of story. Just send a message to the protesters that we stand with them. And send a message to the Chinese. Don't crack heads. I don't know why. It drives me nuts because anytime I see anybody who is fighting for liberty and freedom, and this country doesn't, at least even in diplomatic language, say, whether it's to the Russians, whether it's to Maduro, whether it's to the Castro, well, I was going to say the Castro boys, but that kind of refers now to the San Antonio Mafia, Joaquin and Julian, but I meant Raul and Fidel, but Fidel doesn't matter anymore. Or whether it's to President Xi or Putin or anybody else. Just an acknowledgement that we're watching and that we want this to end peacefully and that we stand behind anybody, everywhere, who is fighting for their individual liberty and their individual freedom. How about that, Mr. President? How about that? There was another mass shooting over the weekend, and apparently nobody covered it. I'm shocked. Weekend gun violence, according to the Chicago Sun-Times, weekend gun violence in Chicago left 4 people dead and at least 43 others wounded, including an 8-year-old girl who was shot Sunday at a barbecue in Humboldt Park. Now, we keep being told that the definition of a mass shooting is a shooting in which 4 or more people are killed. 4 or more people were killed in Chicago over the weekend. Where's the round-the-clock news coverage? On Saturday, a 16-year-old boy was shot to death in Little Village on the southwest side. William Granados was in the front seat of a vehicle about 1:53 a.m. in the 3400 block of West 24th Street when somebody opened fire from the sidewalk. He was struck in the head, taken to Mount Sinai Hospital, where he was pronounced dead on arrival. 4 people killed. That's a mass shooting. Where's the coverage? I think there's a selective coverage of what is and what is not mass shootings. As usual, on Saturday night, we had dinner with friends. I'm not going to tell you where we went, but we were eating in the bar of this place. And, of course, if you recall, Saturday night, I think the Geriatric Stones were in concert downtown, and I think Zach Brown was downtown. I mean, there were concerts everywhere, so we decided not to go anywhere near downtown Saturday night. And we went to a place which we've been before, but we don't go often. And as we sat in the bar, of course, we were there for happy hour because we're old farts, so we're there we're there in time for happy hour. And I ordered some tequila. How do you describe when they're both your friends? Do you say your friend's wife because she's your friend too, Or do you say the wife of your friend? Because anyway, the female part of the couple who are friends of ours, I way overthink too many things. Right, Danielle? I way overthink too many things. The female of the couple that we were having dinner with, when the waitress came over, can you say waitress too, or is that sexist now? Is it all just waiter? The wait staff, the wait person, the waitress? Can you say that? She was, I'm guessing, 32 would be my guess, chronological age. And so the female friend, I just don't want to use their names. Okay, so Sue. So Sue ordered a Coke Zero. I ordered some tequila. I think Jeff ordered a beer. Tamara ordered a glass of wine. And Sue said, "Can I have a straw?" And the waitress said, "Well, of course you can." And the way she said it caused my friend Sue to say something to the effect, "Oh, do you, or I think she asked specifically, is it paper?" And the girl said, "No, it's plastic. It's a good straw." So she gave all of us straws. I didn't need one for my tequila, although, well, maybe I could have used one for my tequila. I don't know. But anyway, so this girl starts talking about how among her friends, she's so sick of going out because of their virtue signaling over straws. Now, I didn't realize this, but the straws that McDonald's gives you, the straws that McDonald's gives you, those are recyclable. Those plastic straws are recyclable. Well, then I start hearing the story between Sue and this waitress that somebody started putting the pressure on McDonald's to get away from the recyclable plastic straws and to start using paper straws, which apparently don't break down as well, or if at all, as do the recyclable plastic straws. And that led to the waitress then engaging in a full-bore conversation about the virtue signaling of her friends when they go out, because she likes straws and she always asks for straws, and she's the Fredo of the group. Yes, she is the Fredo of the group. Well, on CNN's New Day on Tuesday morning, the self-described CNN squad, which is really just a bunch of Trump haters, April Ryan, Bakari Sellers, Angela Ryan, Andrew Gillum, they took a break from bashing the president. They quit talking about immigration. They quit talking about anything the president does. Instead, took valuable CNN time from those 12 listeners to complain about plastic straws. They're absolutely nuts.
Do you like paper straws or plastic straws?
I don't mind paper straws, but I prefer the biodegradable plastic ones. I get frustrated. I'm putting my turmeric ginger latte and it kind of like deforms a little bit.
Listen, this is first world conversation right here. Clearly, we're not going to give the.
Are you calling me an elitist?
I'm not calling you a liberal elite. I'm simply.
Oh, and then he added some stank on it. You added some stank. It was a turmeric. I'm calling Davis. I'm gonna get Davis.
The man was a little ratchet there. Yes, he was a little ratchet.
You guys got to watch Andrew Shade is sneaky.
I think JB just gave you the opportunity. If you would like to weigh in.
This is going to blow up Twitter. I am
but
not.
He supports plastic straws. I think you're in alignment with the president. Go for it.
I want to say that I think. I just don't. I don't like paper straws. That's my preference. It has a hard.
Tweet him.
Let me say this.
I recycle, just for everybody watching.
Everybody get Bakari.
No, please God, don't. But I buy biodegradable plastic straws in your latte. That's what I'm going to start moving towards, because paper straws are a problem.
I'm a tree hugger. They kind of get soft, but you know what?
And they change the flavor of your drink.
At the end of the day, we have holes in our ozone. Okay. At the end of the day, we're seing more severe storms.
It's snowing.
We also have holes in our democracy,
and what's happening in Antarctica? You know, the ice caps are melting. The bottom line is.
Wait a minute. Did you hear that litany of things? We're having severe storms. We got a hole in the ozone. We have whatever she says is happening in the Arctic. I think I don't know whether she meant the Antarctic or the Arctic. I don't know. I don't care. She didn't mention the turtles. But did you know there's a direct causal link between your use of even a biodegradable plastic straw and all of those things? So wherever you live, wherever you're listening to this podcast right now, if you're in the midst of a severe thunderstorm, or you're in the middle of a heat wave, or you're having an unusually cool day in the middle of August, or whatever the weather might be, it's because of plastic straws. Yes, plastic straws destroy everything. And CNN destroys their ratings by talking about plastic straws all the time. And they actually, oh, by the way, the guy that says he likes the plastic straws, he's a black man. I'm just pointing it out. I'm just pointing out that you should know, because all of you who want to cry racism, clearly that guy's a racist. Yeah, a black man using plastic straws. What's the world coming to? Man, oh man. And speaking of the environment and climate change, I happened to just catch a glimpse of this. I was enjoying a really nice bone-in ribeye for dinner last night. And CBS News carried over a story that they had done earlier in the day on CBS This Morning. It's about a teenage girl from Sweden who is called the voice of the planet. She's now ready to cross the Atlantic on a mission to fight climate change. She's going to be sailing from Europe to New York. I guess, taking an airplane. I would be curious about the carbon footprint of a short, say, 7 or 8 hour flight from Sweden or wherever she's flying from to New York versus sailing on a ship. I'd like to know what the comparison is between the carbon footprint of those two. This is the brainwashing of Rugrats.
A teenager from Sweden called the voice of the planet is ready to cross the Atlantic on a mission to fight climate change. In this morning's Eye on Earth, we follow Greta Thunberg. She'll be sailing from Europe to New York to call on world leaders to protect the environment.
All of these people are here to see Greta, a sign of just how much her message is resonating here in Sweden and across Europe. Now she's taking her message to the other side of the Atlantic. How would you rate the United States climate change efforts?
Not very high.
Why not?
Because, the emissions are still rising.
The U.S. releases more carbon emissions than any country except for China. Greta wants all governments to cut emissions in line with the Paris Climate Accord, which...
Do you think she should, while she's in New York, do you think she'll, use a plastic straw while she's in New York? Do you think she should go to the Chinese delegation and chew their asses out about, you're the number one polluter in the world? You're spewing out more carbon than anybody. Why don't you do that, you little twerp?
President Trump has rejected. Would you meet with President Trump?
Why should I waste time talking?
Exactly. Why should I waste time listening to you two?
Him when he, of course, is not going to listen to me.
Yeah, nobody's going to listen to you. Well, I take that back. CBS News listens to her, and you just had to. Remember the Andy Griffith Show? If I could whistle, I'd whistle that theme song, but I can't whistle very well. So I will save you the misery of doing that. But you may remember that Barney Fife was allowed 1 bullet. Well, the same thing's happening in South Africa as cops lose their guns and ammo. Now, how's a criminal to acquire guns and ammo in a society that has completely succumbed to the left? Once again, the rainbow utopia of South Africa shows us clearly how. It's been reported that 41% of cops, 8,731 out of 21,206, who were assessed failed their annual shooting test. 41%. Lieutenant General Elias Mwela blamed the poor performance on a lack of ammunition for training. Now, you might ask, well, get them more ammunition. Or you might ask it this way, why are they short on ammunition? Well, since 2013, the South Africa Police Service lost 4,357 firearms, and they lost an incredible 9.6 million rounds of ammo. Now, I don't know, call me crazy, but my guess is that lost guns, lost ammo is probably going to be found on the black market. Now, cops who can't pass the shooting test have had to hand in their weapons. Meanwhile, If you know anything about South Africa, violent crime in South Africa just continues to shoot through the stratosphere. But there's still some remnant of a free market in South Africa. There are 2.5 private security guards for every cop in the country. But they too, the security guards, will have to turn in their guns eventually, as will all law-abiding private citizens if the country continues to tailspin into leftism. Before long, you know where this is going. Before long, in South Africa, only the criminals will have guns. Huh, where have you heard that before? I often wonder if things can get any crazier in Los Angeles than apparently they can. You know, progressives always self-righteously side with them versus us. It's always an us versus them with lefties. But in the dystopia subsidized homelessness that is making Los Angeles, or I should say maybe it's taking down Los Angeles, it comes down to humans versus the burgeoning rats that spread, serious diseases like typhus. Well, guess whose side leftist local authorities are taking? That's right, they're taking the side of the rats. California Assemblyman Richard Bloom of hoity-toity Santa Monica wants to ban second-generation rat poisons. See, the problem is the rats have developed an immunity to first-generation rat poisons. He says that he is worried about predatory species such as raptors, bobcats, and foxes that regularly consume rodents as part of their diet. Poisoned rodents also become more lethargic and exhibit abnormal behavior, according to an analysis of the bill that he put forth. But the analysis says that data is, quote, less conclusive in pointing to rat poisons as the specific cause of death in dead animals. Now, hawks dying from the rat poison is theoretical, just like CO2 is exacerbating global warming is theoretical. But here's what's not theoretical, and that is the threat that Los Angeles' exploding rat population actually poses to human beings. But of course, human beings in the pecking order are way down at the bottom, and rats are above us. I think human beings, I think it's rats, human beings, congressmen, lawyers. I'm not sure who's after that. Typhus cases spread by fleas hosted primarily by rats. That typhus cases numbered 109 in 2018. That has more than doubled in the past 7 years. Now, people die of typhus, and it's already reached epidemic levels in Los Angeles. Rats have even carried it into City Hall. Now, some suspect that bubonic plague, also spread by rats, is already present in Los Angeles. Now, another threat that is not theoretical but actually is posed by wind turbines, which kills hundreds of hawks every year. But these turbines are subsidized by the same sort of, dumbasses that would ban rat poison. Too bad we just can't send in a few thousand feral cats. There's no shortage of feral cats. Remember that story? But with today's rats, well, that might not work out very well. Rats over humans in Los Angeles. Next time you go, just be careful. Those of you who have listened to me for any length of time know that I've often questioned when we start rationing health care, much like the National Health Service does in the United Kingdom presently, will we reach a point where a decision is made that you're not going to get the heart transplant, you're not going to get the liver transplant, you're not going to get the open heart surgery, you're not going to get whatever because you ate too many cheeseburgers, and you're a fat ass? Well, the reason socialized medicine is the holy grail for authoritarianism is that it gives to government, in particular government bureaucrats, it gives them the power to decide who lives and who dies. And if you're an authoritarian, there is no greater nirvana than getting to choose who lives and dies. Now, a free market economy can, at least in potential, pay for almost anything, because there is theoretically no limit to how much wealth we can create if the government would just leave us alone. The wealth pie is not a limited pie. There aren't only 8 slices. The wealth pie can grow as much, it can just continue to grow. Most lefties don't get that. They think there's a limited amount of wealth and that they need to redistribute that wealth because, well, people on the lower rungs of the wealth ladder will never be able to get wealthier because the rich at the top of the wealth ladder have sucked up all the wealth. I mean, that's just so economically ignorant I can't believe it, but that's what they actually believe. But in contrast, under socialism, there is a fixed pie. And with that fixed pie under socialism, the authorities decide who gets a slice of the pie and who does not. Well, when you have socialized medicine, that could be bad news if you're fat. Let's go to the National Health Service. Veteran BBC presenter Michael Burke has proclaimed that Britain's National Health Service should withhold care from those who do not conform to body mass index requirements. I told you. It was just a matter of time. I'd like to say, I will say I told you so. The BBC presenter said that, according to this story, those who are obese may be making a selfless sacrifice to stop the country being overpopulated if they die a decade earlier than the rest of the population. Now, I don't know, the Nazis might have called this ridding the Reich of useless eaters. He actually believes that, yeah, let fat people die of, if they get too fat, they're obese, and they die 10 years earlier, well, that's good for the rest of the population. He also queried the Public Health England's claim that overweight and obesity-related ill health costs the National Health Service about £6.1 billion a year. Now, he's all worried that if fat people live to be old instead of, quote, keeling over with a heart attack at 52, it's going to cost the Brits a lot of money, and therefore he believes they should die. He added that, quote, the freedom to make bad choices is what personal autonomy, indeed democracy, is all about. Who is to say longevity is the ultimate goal in life? Well, I'd like to live as healthy and as long as possible. I think that sounds fair, except that fat people still have to pay for everybody else's health care with their taxes. Now, whatever dumbasses contemplate an abuse of power, whenever dumbasses contemplate an abuse of power, they always fall back on the global warming hoax. He says this: the obese will die a decade earlier than the rest of us. See that as a selfless sacrifice in the fight against demographic imbalance, overpopulation, and climate change. So even letting old people live makes it too warm outside. But denying them care, according to him, is going to save money. The National Health Service estimates that almost a third of adults in the United Kingdom are obese, and that 1 in 5 children aged 10 to 11 are obese. To save even more money, I think we should just alter the definition of obese. Then you don't have as many fat people. Now, you might be thinking, who cares? I'm skinny. Well, they might also cut off health care to smokers. But who cares? I don't smoke. You ever heard that before? They came after, but I didn't care. I didn't pay any attention. Socialized medicine. Be very, very wary. I'll be right back. A lot of times people will ask me when I'm giving a speech during a Q&A session or just in casual conversation with people, they'll ask me about prepper issues and what should you have in a go bag? What should you have ready to go in case of a natural or man-made disaster or a terrorist event? And I'll go through the things that I have in my bag. And usually when I get to this particular, well, there's two things. Let me first describe medicine. This drives me nuts. So, I'm on different medications. Of course I am, right? So, and thanks to Dr. Grossman for keeping me on these medications. They have fundamentally altered my life. But here's what drives me nuts. I have always, because of these certain medications and because of the way these third-party pharmaceutical beneficiary groups, whatever you call them, now operate, I used to always keep an extra 90-day supply of all medications. And in fact, when Tamara's dad was alive, we kept extra, we had We had our own pharmacy. We never abused it, but we had antibiotics. We had all sorts of medications that most people that don't have a doctor in the family weren't able to keep. Well, those days are long gone because no longer can you get. I've actually asked my doctor can you give me a script for an extra 90-day supply of X? No, because that's a class 4 drug or whatever it is, and I'm not allowed to write that script. Okay, well then what happens if there's a natural disaster or something and the supply chain is disrupted and I can't get that medication for 120 days, and so I run out? Well, I guess you run out. It is so stupid. And the reason for that is because a few people abuse those drugs. Those of us who need them and don't abuse them are the ones that pay the price for it. It's always the law-abiding citizen that ends up paying the price for the law-breaking citizen, and that drives me nuts. So anyway, medication is one of the things I always tell people to have an extra supply of in their go bag, because you never know when you can't get that supply of drugs for a couple of weeks. And if you're down to 1 week and you need a 30-day supply, you're SOL. Look it up, SOL. The other thing I always tell people, and they go, well, duh, why? Cash. Put some cash in your go bag. $100, $200, $500, $1,000, I don't care what it is, but put some cash, or always have cash available somewhere, because somewhere, sometime when you least expect it, you're going to need cash because your stupid credit card or your Apple Pay or your Venmo or whatever you happen to use to conduct transactions electronically is going to be unavailable. Well, as we continue to move closer and closer to a cashless society, I am struck by the ignorance about the necessity for cash. If the power goes out, and if you're like Tamara told me the story about going through a McDonald's to get a McDonald's to get a Diet Coke the other day, and I forget what it was, it was $1.10, whatever it was. She gave extra money so that she could get like just a dime back or something. And she says the kid didn't know how to do it, or at least it appeared that he was trying to do the calculations on his phone. Now, I think he was doing something else, because if you have a point of sale system in a McDonald's and somebody hands you, $2.25 for something that is $1 and I don't know, whatever it might be, so you want to get exact change back, the point of sale should show that to you. But she was convinced that this kid couldn't do the calculation in his head to just give her the dime back and change. Well, it doesn't surprise me, but anyway, I digress. The idea that the power goes out, well, you can't pump gas, or you go to the grocery store, I'm not even sure they can open the registers without electricity based on these new point-of-sale systems. So whenever I hear stories about millennials going cashless.
So let's talk about this. We know fewer and fewer Canadians are going out and taking out huge amounts of money to carry around in their wallet all week to make their transactions. How significant has the shift been lately?
Well, more than we expected. We conduct research regularly. Payments Canada runs infrastructure for payments in Canada, as well as sets the rules across the country. And we're modernizing that, and to make sure that we modernize so that we meet Canadians' needs, we do research. And what we have found is that the way we pay is changing. And millennials are out in front. In many ways, they're leading us on what we can expect in the future. There are three trends that we see happening. One is a lot less use of cash. The millennials, as a category, over 50% use cash less than 4 times a month. That's once a week. And that is dramatically up from last year when it was 20%. So we're seeing a massive shift away from cash. The second is 3/4 of millennials make a purchase decision online in order based on the payment experience rather than only the product. So they are choosing where to shop based on how easy it is to make the payment.
Now, again, I admit, I love Venmo. I love using Apple Pay. I anytime I don't have to use cash, I don't use cash. In fact, I pay for everything with I keep two separate credit cards. One for they're both Chase. I get United miles on them. One for business expenses and one for personal expenses. And I collect miles every month. And of course, I pay the credit cards off every month too. But so while I love being able to pay electronically, I always have cash. I always have cash. Now, I'm not saying that because I want you to mug me. I'm saying that because as we keep moving more and more to a cashless society, don't be fooled. There will come a time somewhere, somehow, when you're going to need cash for reasons well beyond your control, and you're going to think back to this podcast and go, well, crap. I wish I'd kept some cash in my wallet. Be warned. Judge Andrew Napolitano of Fox News, he is their judicial or legal consultant. I forget exactly what his title is. He was on with Neil Cavuto, and Neil was referencing Senator Pat Toomey, I think, and how Republicans were beginning to move towards some of these gun laws, and in particular, red flag laws. And Neil turns to Judge Napolitano and says, but you think that there are problems with these bills. What is that?
Well, Neil, good afternoon. It's always a pleasure to be with you. The proposal that the president offered the other day is called a red flag law. That's a law by which the federal government would pay the states to change their state laws so that anybody who wants to raise a red flag, my next-door neighbor's a little crazy, but he has a gun, I think you should come and take it away from him, can cause the gun owner to be dragged into court. In some states, the gun is taken away before there's a hearing, and then the hearing decides whether or not the gun owner might abuse it in the future. That's the serious constitutional problem, Neil, because in this country, it's been this way for 230 years now, the presumption of innocence and the due process requirements mean you can only be punished for something you've done in the past, not something you might do in the future.
But you did say, though, that, and it was a brilliant column looking at this, you said you can do it on the basis of a fear of what a person might do. But what if relatives or friends are telegraphing authorities, hey, we're worried. We don't like what we're seeing. It concerns us greatly. That was the case of the mother of the shooter in El Paso, telegraphing local officials, should he own a gun? I mean, what's the deal?
You know, when these tragedies happen, there's a natural instinct. I myself have this instinct for the government to want to do something to keep us safe. God forbid something like this should happen again. And now we see that there were red flags. There were warning signs for both Dayton, Ohio, and El Paso. But the supreme law of the land is the Constitution. And the Constitution simply does not permit taking a right away because somebody fears it might be abused in the future. When the Supreme Court last looked at the right to keep and bear arms, it called it a fundamental individual liberty. That's in the same category as speech and privacy and religion. That is the highest category of rights. It can't be taken away because the government fears you might abuse it. It can only be taken away if you have committed a crime in the past.
But would this apply today if our founders knew what would go on today? Now, I know you alluded to the fact that a lot of this was meant.
Can I just pause for a moment? I love Neil. He's a good friend, and he's been very, very good to me. But if the founders were here today, would they say, oh, yes, you should be able to limit speech because when we said that Congress shall make no law abridging the right to freedom of speech, we didn't anticipate the internet or email. We didn't anticipate the printing press. We didn't anticipate the telegraph, the telephone. We didn't anticipate any of these electronic marvels that we now have that allow speech. I mean, it is a stupid argument to make. Because when you think about the rights under the Constitution, they are eternal. They are eternal regardless of the technology that may develop around those rights. Anyway, I just wanted to intervene and say that, or interject that, I think, and I understand that Neil needs to ask the question, but holy cow, let's quit asking that question. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. How far have we fallen from that?
Address the abuses of government, so the British government, more to the point, and the right to bear arms to challenge that, not just some inconvenience or hunting issues. But now society has morphed into all of these kind of events where such shootings have gotten increasingly common. Does the government then have an obligation to address what has changed mightily in the 200-plus years since these guys came together?
The short answer to your question is yes. The government does have an obligation, but the obligation must comply with the Constitution. The government could actually make it easier for people to carry weapons and have them trained in carrying the weapons, so when these things start, or maybe they wouldn't start because the creeps that are about to start them know, hey, the guy next door to me, the guy right there standing next to me in the Walmart is armed and he's going to shoot me as soon as he sees me take my weapon out. But to take a fundamental liberty...
I think that's actually a great argument. And I know many people will say, oh my gosh, you're advocating going back to what is romanticized as the Wild, Wild West. Well, to a certain degree, I kind of am. It has been proven empirically that more guns equal less crime. Look it up. It's true.
From someone. Where will that slippery slope stop? Will the government next be taking away the freedom of speech because of a fear that you might abuse it, you might arouse a crowd by an incendiary speech? We're not in that business, and we've never been in that business, and that's why we have the Constitution, the purpose of which is to preserve human liberty, even when that liberty is unpopular, especially when that liberty is unpopular.
Amen and amen. Especially when that liberty is unpopular. We have an even stronger obligation to protect that liberty. But let's go back to the point about, well, we think somebody might commit a crime. Minority Report? Go watch it. If we get into the business of trying to anticipate whether or not someone might commit a crime and having the government take action based on what somebody might do, that's not a slippery slope. That's a slip and slide. Oh, I'm sorry, that's a reference that maybe some of you youngsters won't get. Look it up. I'll be right back. Just as I mentioned in that last segment about as the amount of guns in America has increased, that violent crime has actually been on the decrease, most people don't believe that. And it's very easily ascertained to be true with just a cursory search, even on the interwebs. You can find through the FBI statistics and others, even through the CDC, that indeed, as gun ownership has increased and the number of guns in the United States has increased, violent crime has steadily been decreasing, even in light of the recent mass shootings in Gilroy and El Paso and Dayton. I think that points to a larger issue about how many Americans don't understand the reality of what's going on in the world around them. And a case in point is poverty. There is still an overwhelming majority of Americans, 95% in fact, that are confused about the state of global poverty. There's a survey from the late Hans Rosling's web project, Gapminder, that assessed the public's knowledge on the subject of global poverty. The survey asked about 12,000 people in 14 countries if, over the past 20 years, the proportion of the world's population living in extreme poverty has, what, doubled, stayed the same, or cut almost in half. Now, what do you think? Over the past 2 decades, do you think the proportion of the world's population living in extreme poverty has almost doubled? Has it stayed the same? Or has it been cut almost in half? The correct answer is extreme poverty has been cut almost in half. But a staggering 19 in 20 Americans get that answer wrong. In fact, most people in all the 14 countries where the survey was administered, most people got it wrong. So the question is, how is it possible that so many people, and I think this is where conservatives miss the mark all the time in talking about the effects of capitalism and free markets. How is it possible that so many people are unaware of the extraordinary, and I would actually say unprecedented decline in world poverty that has occurred over the past 20 years? How is that possible? In some cases, it's because they're following the headlines instead of the trend lines. People in the news know that pessimistic narratives actually attract more clicks than heartening long-term trends. How many times do I say, look at the trend line? And as we get in the election season, you're going to hear me as we start. Polls don't matter in my opinion right now, but as we get further and further in the election season, you'll hear me once again pointing out what the trend lines are. Well, studies show that people in the news know that pessimistic narratives attract more clicks and more eyeballs than heartening long-term trends. You know, of course, if it bleeds, it leads. And obviously, many in the media share the broader public's ignorance of the progress that humanity has made in the fight against world poverty. Here are the stats. I just want to give you a few numbers. The share of the public who knew that global extreme poverty was falling. A random guess, just randomly guessing whether it had almost doubled or stayed the same or been cut in almost half, people who just randomly guessed got it right a third of the time. In Sweden, 25% of the people got it right, as in Norway. In Finland, only 17% of people got it right. In Japan, only 10%. The United Kingdom, only 9% got it right. Canada to the north, only 9% got it right. Then Germany and in Australia, only 6% got it right. And in the United States, 5%. South Korea, 4%, France, 4%, Spain, 3%, Hungary, 2%. Yet global extreme poverty has been cut in almost half over the past 20 years. Now, do you think that's because of socialism? Or do you think that's because of a combination of free markets and humanitarian works? Yeah, it's because of that. Hang on, I'll be right back. In the world of corporate governance, oftentimes, whether it's, and it's more often in a membership organization as opposed to like a publicly traded company, but in particular in membership organizations, particularly large organizations that have been around for decades or longer. I think of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce as an example that recently fired its CEO because once there was a legitimate audit done and there was some public disclosure of some of the expenditures that the CEO was incurring, there was a public outcry from the members who pay hard-earned dues to be members of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Well, I think the same thing is happening to the National Rifle Association. There was a story, and I forget how long ago it was, but it's been this calendar year, I believe, in which Wayne LaPierre, who is the longtime executive director, I forget how long he's been there, but it's like since dirt was invented. There was a report that he had fended off boardroom dissent over revelations about more than $540,000 in travel expenses and clothing expenses. Now, I don't remember over what period of time that was, but when I read the original story about how much he had charged the organization, the National Rifle Association, when I first read about how much he had charged them for clothing and travel expenses, I thought to myself, this is one reason why I never belonged to the NRA. I have other reasons, and look, I support the Second Amendment, and I support Second Amendment organizations. I've just never supported the NRA for a whole host of reasons that maybe someday I'll disclose and maybe I won't. But for a long time, the National Rifle Association has used an advertising firm based in Oklahoma City named Ackerman McQueen, Inc. Let's go back to the $540,000 of clothing and travel expenses. Here is what I think is the underhanded, if not fraudulent, activity engaged in between Ackerman McQueen and Wayne LaPierre. You see, the $540,000 that was reported by, I think, either Bloomberg or the Wall Street Journal, the $540,000 of clothing and travel expenses was picked up by the advertising agency and then included in their billing for advertising and media relations. They then billed the National Rifle Association, let's say, $100,000. And built into that $100,000, what am I kidding? That's not going to cover the amount. Let's say that Ackerman McQueen billed the National Rifle Association one month $1 million. And included in that $1 million bill, but hidden in the bill, was $540,000 of clothing and travel expenses. Now, obviously, that didn't happen in 1 month. That occurred over a series of billings. But I consider it to be fraudulent. Now we learn a top National Rifle Association executive signed a document agreeing that the gun rights organization would be a 99% owner of a company formed for the specific purpose of buying a $6 million Dallas mansion for the CEO, Wayne LaPierre. This is according to a document obtained by the Wall Street Journal. The document also shows that the NRA agreed to contribute $6.5 million to the company formed to buy the property, yet raising more questions about the NRA's previous statements that not any of the gun rights group's money was used to purchase the house for Wayne LaPierre. Now, the house purchase never occurred, but it raises questions about the dealings between Ackerman McQueen and Wayne LaPierre. So here's how they were going to do it. Wayne LaPierre and his wife, Susan, toured this 10,000 square foot house in a gated golf community near Dallas. Then they go to Ackerman McQueen and say, we'd like to buy this house. So Ackerman McQueen, the advertising agency, agrees to create an LLC. The LLC is going to be funded by money from, 99% of the money from the National Rifle Association and 1% by Ackerman McQueen, who, not to cast aspersions on Ackerman McQueen, they've got enough problems of their own, but they would probably end up billing that 1% that they were going to contribute to the LLC back to the NRA anyway, meaning that the NRA would fund 100% of the LLC that would then go buy the house that would then somehow provide it to Wayne LaPierre and his wife to live in. The Wall Street Journal says, when the Journal reported the aborted house deal last week, the NRA said the house was to have been purchased by a company owned by senior Ackerman executives, and Mr. LaPierre shut down the transaction after discovering that the ad agency intended to use NRA funds for the deal. William Brewer, an outside NRA attorney, said, not a cent of NRA money was ultimately spent. That's lawyer weasel words. Not a cent of NRA money was ultimately spent. And I emphasize ultimately spent because the Wall Street Journal reported Monday that the NRA actually sent a $70,000 check in May of 2018 to the company formed to buy the house. Now, they returned the money the following month, but to me, the NRA check is the most tangible sign of money flow in the proposed deal. Yes, if you're a member of the NRA, they were going to use your dues money to buy a How much was the house? $6 million? Yes, a $6 million mansion for the executive director. In a statement, NRA spokesman Andrew Lundeman said, "As we have said repeatedly, neither Mr. LaPierre nor the board ever formally considered, much less approved, an investment in the house in question or the other properties shown by Ackerman McQueen's real estate agents." You know, this stinks to high heaven to me. Wayne LaPierre runs the National Rifle Association with an iron glove, an iron-fisted glove. He knew exactly what was going on, and he's now gotten his hand caught in the kitty once again. First for $540,000 of clothing and travel expenses that he billed to the ad agency that then billed it back to the NRA. See how this works? And then he wanted a $6 million house. It's time for Wayne LaPierre to step down. It is time, and I know that, I know some of the board members of the NRA, some of whom have resigned, I think, in light of some of these allegations. But this is another example of how when you become so big and you become so elitist that you think you're above the law, that you think you answer to nobody. Now, if you're a member of the NRA, power to you. Join whatever Second Amendment rights organization you want to. But if you are a member of the NRA, you might want to look up these stories. And you might want to start asking the board member from your area, or the board member that you might know, or just whoever your local representative is, what the hell's going on in the National Rifle Association. Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. I know this is where most of you tune out. Don't do it. Instead, do me a favor. If you listen to us on iTunes or you download us from iTunes, give us a 5-star rating and write a nice review. If you do it on iHeart, be sure and share us, and then be sure and join me on all the social media platforms. You know how to do that. You go to michaelbrowntoday.com. Go to the website, michaelbrowntoday.com, and everything you need for YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter are all right there at michaelbrowntoday.com. Again, thanks for listening. I'll talk to you tomorrow.